joining me.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
All right, we are going to talk a lot about tax reform, your role with the BRT. But first, I want to step back a little bit. Cisco has a 40-year legacy of building basically the backbone of the internet. But I want to make sure that, just to kind of set the stage here for folks here, what is the company that Cisco is of today? Cybersecurity, AI, cloud. Talk to us about that.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And I mean, Cisco was obviously a big player early on, and we still are in building the technology that runs the fundamental internet. When I have these young kids that I interact with today, and they're like, what do you guys do? And I said, well, just put it this way. You would hate your life if we didn't do what we do. And your phone wouldn't work, and none of those apps would work. And they're like, huh, really? And so, but we transitioned. We now have, we have almost a $10 billion cybersecurity business, probably the largest pool of threat intelligence in the world. We're now building and delivering on a lot of the AI infrastructure that actually sits beneath these GPU clusters that NVIDIA and others are selling. We're helping enterprises actually embrace AI from an infrastructure perspective. And so there's we've expanded significantly, and it's an interesting time for sure.
Yeah. That is the understatement. A very interesting time here in Washington.
I thought you were going to lead off with like basketball or something.
Yeah, okay. So tell you, March Madness, who's your pick?
No, let's just keep going.
Okay, all right. Well, back to it.
I'm a North Carolina fan. Let's move on.
Exactly. Just trying to see you on good footing
here.
I'm
sorry. I didn't know why I brought that up.
I don't want to get too contentious. I want to talk. You are chair of the BRT, the Business Roundtable. In that role, obviously playing a key kind of voice for the business of America when it comes to tax reform. President Donald Trump is set to meet with you guys today. What are you expecting to hear from the president?
I didn't know he was coming. Is he coming? No, we...
Come on, guys, that was a joke.
They're like, how did he not know that?
I know. Like, tweets.
I did wake up to a text from one of our members today. He said, I just saw on the news that the president's coming. Is that right? I'm like, yeah, we'll let you know. But nonetheless, I think today we're going to talk about the things that matter. We're going to talk about tax. We're going to talk about trade. We're probably going to talk about immigration. We'll talk about all the things that are top of mind that you're talking about all day today.
Right.
And so we're looking forward to having that dialogue later. And by the way, we've had every sitting president, I think, since Reagan has actually attended the BRT. It is impressive that he's coming on the first meeting we've had post-inauguration, so we're really happy about that.
Do you want to hear about the economy from him as well, I assume?
That would be helpful.
All right. Yeah. Well, you can let me know.
I think all the other topics actually lead us to that, right? So.
All right, let's talk about tax policy. Talk to me about the role tax policy has when it comes to driving innovation, economic growth for a company like Cisco.
Well, it's not just for a company like Cisco, it's for all companies. I think having a competitive tax rate globally is so important. First of all, we compete with companies all around the world, and I say we, meaning American business. We compete with companies all around the world that are, in many cases, being aided by their own governments as we compete with them around the world. They have, in many cases, very favorable tax rates, if any taxes at all, in certain countries. And so that's one piece of it. Second is, we want to also make sure that our tax policy leads us to investments in the United States. And so I think the 2017 tax policies did that, encouraged research and development in the U.S., which is very important, encouraged the relocation of our intellectual property to the U.S. so that we pay more taxes in the U.S. than we did before. Everybody has this misconception that in 2017, corporate America got a windfall, that we pay such lower taxes now than we did. Actually, we paid record taxes to the United States since the 2017 tax reform. It's really important to understand because all of us were paying lots of taxes around the world, and what the 2017 tax reform did is it consolidated a lot of those tax dollars back to the United States. So just to give you an example, Cisco in fiscal 17, we paid $1 billion to the United States in federal tax. In fiscal 23, after the big tax cut, we paid $2.7 billion to the United States. So it's a really important thing to remember. It's not like this was some big windfall. Everybody, I mean, for some companies it was, but that's our example, and I think that's the example of most.
We'll talk about that. So let's go back in time a little bit before we talk about what you all are trying to get done this year.
Sorry, I can't stand it. Let's go.
I know, I like it, the fire in the belly. But I do want to talk about this. So basically, 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, you supported that legislation.
Very much so.
And you made some real big decisions, right, in terms of what the strategy was going to be in terms of bringing back IP, intellectual property, to the U.S., growth and investment. Talk about that.
Well, first of all, I think there was $2.5 trillion of trapped earnings that were brought back and invested in the United States. In our case, there's a FDII provision, which basically we brought all of our intellectual property back to the United States, which means 90% of the taxes that Cisco pays on a global basis today, 90% of those taxes are now paid in the U.S. If you go back to pre-2017, it was 45%. So, I mean, that's the impact, and that's just part of the misconception. So we now invest more. We have the R&D expensing, which we need back again, which allows us to invest heavily in R&D resources in the United States. I think we spend $5-6 billion here every year in R&D, as do a lot of other companies. And those are the kinds of things we want to continue to encourage and maintain.
So, in your role as chair of BRT, as heading up Cisco, you're making the case to Congress, to the Trump administration about what corporate America needs when it comes to the tax process this time around. What are some of the top priorities?
Well, I'd say there are three that just jump out. First is the rate at 21% is really important to all of us. Second is this FDII provision, which is to encourage. What we don't want to do is encourage companies to go back to where they were before 2017. So don't encourage companies to go hide their IP in tax-friendly countries around the world. We don't want that. We want it here in the United States. And the third is this expensing of R&D. We need that immediate expensing, which I think is a big play. And then we can talk further about some of the proposals around manufacturing and things like that.
Are you encouraged or discouraged by the state of the talk so far?
We're always optimistic. You know? I think I'm encouraged. I mean, I think that it's much more complicated this year. I think that's clear. We have a meaningful deficit that we're trying to deal with. Interest rates are much higher now, so servicing that deficit is much higher. There's competing interests, and there are things that are important like the border, which Senator Langford was talking about before, which needs and has begun to be dealt with. But I am optimistic that I think the numbers just speak. I mean, if you get the simple data that I just shared, kind of dispels this whole notion that we got some big tax windfall. And if you look at the U.S.'s competitiveness on a global basis, when you take the 21 and the average state tax that we all pay, we're still in the upper end of the OECD range. So it's not like we're out just, with this massively competitive tax rate.
So talk about just kind of how the positioning that you're thinking about, right? There's a lot of different industries. Every company's up there. Big companies, small companies, private, nonprofit. I mean, we kind of just heard Jake and Senator Langford go through a lot of different provisions, and they're really technical, right? There's a lot of jockeying happening when it comes to reconciliation. How are you kind of guiding the BRT member companies and advocating on Capitol Hill?
Well, we're trying to stay very tight on the top three that really matter. Companies are always going to have a multitude of other things they care about, and our members will continue to go off and they'll work those issues. I think we've had 60 companies that have had meetings with 250 congressional leaders on this topic. We're just trying to make sure we stay consistent on at least the top three, and we're just trying to activate the team to make sure that this is about creating jobs, increasing wages. If you look at the first 2 years after the 2017 tax cuts, real wages went up 5%, right? Many of our companies have these whole hiring stories that they can talk about how how many people in the United States they hired as a result of that. And so I think we're just trying to tell those stories and make sure that the data is what is really important in the facts and not necessarily the belief or the perception or some of the stories that get cooked up by the folks that don't want this to happen.
So I want to go deeper on a few of the issues. You've mentioned a couple of them, but I want to talk about FIDE with the foreign-derived intangible income. That's a mouthful, so I actually think FIDE works better. We'll use the shorthand. But you talked about how it was really impactful for Cisco kind of from 2017. But let's fast forward to today. What do you think happens if Congress moves to increase the rate in 2026 or beyond?
Well, a lot of companies didn't make the move that Cisco made because they were concerned that this would happen.
Short term. It was going to be short-term
They're-
policy.
This is not going to. It's not going to happen. So a lot of companies left their IP outside the United States because of this exact concern. So I think you'll see companies that will. Companies are always going to optimize for tax. They're going to optimize for tariffs. I mean, supply chains and all those things. That's what we do, and so we do. Risk mitigation, and so you'll see companies begin to do anything they can to efficiently lower their tax rate if that involves moving IP somewhere else, and I think that's what you'll see happen.
On R&D investment, you talked about that, another hot topic in this space. The TCJA changed the way that the R&D tax deductions work. So since 2022, now companies are required to amortize U.S. research costs over 5 years and 15 years for foreign research costs. I am not a tax expert, but I did do a little bit of research on this. Instead of an immediate deduction, how did that kind of going from this longer period of being able to kind of amortize research costs, how did that change the 5 or the 15 year?
It's simple math. I mean, if I get $1 billion write-off in 1 year versus 5 years, I'm going to invest more. I'm going to invest that same billion the next year. If the next year I'm starting with $200 million and I'm only going to get X amount, then you're just going to invest at a much slower pace in R&D. That's the simplest way to explain it. And that is real. That's just nothing but real research jobs created in the United States. It's that simple. It's not like it's complicated. Like, well, what do they really do with those dollars? That's R&D. Those are engineers and people building products, doing research, quantum research, AI, all these things that we care about deeply as a country. Those are the kinds of things that will go much faster if we have this provision back in.
And so you basically kind of reinstate the previous provision?
Yeah, it just expired.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Okay. Let's talk tariffs, manufacturing, obviously a very hot topic right now with President Donald Trump every day kind of making different policy decisions, threatening and implementing in some cases tariffs that he believes are really focused on rebuilding U.S. manufacturing, trying to address trade deficits, among other things. There's a lot of companies very concerned I've been talking to about this, given just the uncertainty that this is creating for businesses. How concerned are you about this new tariff policy or kind of the process that the president is engaging in?
Well, I think look, you start from the position that all tariffs aren't bad, right? Nobody is like saying all tariffs are bad. There are legitimate reasons, there's legitimate places, and I think the president believes that the things that he is trying to resolve are legitimate reasons. So let's just say they are. What business needs is clarity, right? What businesses don't do well with uncertainty because it freezes you. As an example, right now, companies who are exposed to the Mexico tariffs today, they don't necessarily. They can't actually take action to resolve the Mexico tariffs because they don't know what's going to come next. So if they go spend $10 or $20 million to mitigate the tariffs and then something happens wherever they go to mitigate the tariffs, now you might say, well, just move it all to the U.S. and you don't have to worry about it anymore. There's a lot of components that are still coming in from outside the U.S., so that doesn't necessarily resolve the issue. But I mean, clarity. It's markets want clarity, companies want clarity. And the fear is that companies begin to just do the classic, I'm going to just pause investments right now until we understand this just a little bit better.
Right. I mean, one of the president's goals is rebuilding U.S. manufacturing. Are there policies you think Republicans should be considering in reconciliation when it comes to trying to increase or incentivize U.S. manufacturing?
Well, I mean, it depends on the industry, right? I think there's a lot of, and I've talked to them about, like, let's sit down and build a plan and actually lay out what it would take for us to do it. What are the barriers? How do we solve them together? You got labor costs in the United States are just fundamentally higher. So maybe the 15% tax rate on manufacturing in the U.S. is being proposed to offset the labor cost. But then we have a component ecosystem, and technology companies have component ecosystems that don't exist in the United States. So all that stuff, for some period of time, is coming into the country. So we have to deal with, if we want to get manufacturing here, is there some exemption we ought to think about with tariffs, assuming there's a plan to build the component ecosystem in the United States? I mean, it's a super complicated thing, and it's not like, let's say I'm I'm buying commodities from a country and there are tariffs on them, and I have an alternative to buy commodities from Wisconsin, then I just shift and buy from Wisconsin. That doesn't exist in the tech industry. It just doesn't exist. So my message is, we don't disagree. Let's sit down and build a plan together and figure out how we actually make this happen in a more expedited way than the current path.
On that fact, I mean, it feels like a little bit of the certainty is like, planning for manufacturing. I mean, this isn't done in a monthly kind of cadence, right?
No.
I mean, what's your, if there was one top line message, you got a lot of staff watching this, you have people that are advocating across industries, a lot of different, kind of industries represented. What's the top thing from your perspective that like they need to be thinking about when it comes to tax reform?
Who's they?
Congress, White House.
The tax reform. I think you just need to make sure that you really understand the facts about what the implications of the 2017 tax plan was. Don't assume that it was some big tax break, first of all. Secondly, you should make sure that our tax policy promotes growth in the United States, job creation in the United States, research and development in the United States, and to some extent, perhaps manufacturing in the United States. I think those are the two things that matter. Start with the facts, and then make sure you're building policy that encourages, it's a pro-growth agenda in the United States of America.
All right, we're gonna leave it there. Chuck, thank you so much. I
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you all so much for joining us.